Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about a philosopher who had a pretty radical idea about democracy. He thought it shouldn't be something you only think about on election day. Nope. He argued it should be a hands-on, daily practice, basically a way of life. This is the story of John Dewey.
Okay, so let's just dive right in with this question, because it gets to the absolute heart of John Dewey's most powerful idea. He was challenging people to stop thinking about democracy like it's some finished product we own, and instead start seeing it as an active, collaborative thing, something we are all building together every single day.
To really get where Dewey was coming from, you have to picture his world. We're talking about post-Civil War America, a nation just bursting at the seams with industrial energy. You've got cities exploding, factories churning out new stuff, and new conflicts. The old ways of thinking were just falling apart. Dewey saw that the biggest problems of his time were coming from these intense stresses and strains in the life of the community. And in the middle of all this change and crisis, the official philosophy being taught in American universities, well, it felt completely and utterly useless. It was all abstract, so distant from reality, and it had pretty much nothing to say about the very real problems people were dealing with. Now, what's really wild is just how massive the disconnect was. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got the dominant philosophy of the day, which was imported from Germany. It was idealistic, always searching for some kind of absolute, cosmic unity, what the philosopher William James called a through-and-through universe. But on the other side, you had American reality, messy, practical, full of strikes, class warfare, and the really unsettling new ideas from Darwin's theory of evolution. The two worlds they weren't even speaking the same language.
So this huge gap between theory and reality, it basically sent Dewey on a mission. He realized America needed its own philosophy, one that wasn't just for sitting around and contemplating the universe, but for action, a tool to actually help solve the urgent problems of a society that was constantly in motion. You know, Dewey's big ideas didn't just pop out of nowhere. They were forged on a very specific journey. He actually started out steeped in that German idealism, studying under guys like Torrey and Morris. But then, two things happened that changed everything. First, he read William James, whose psychology treated the mind not as this passive mirror of reality, but as a fighter for ends. And second, he witnessed the absolutely brutal Pullman strike in Chicago. That event, more than anything, convinced him that philosophy had to get its hands dirty. And this led Dewey to become a central figure in this new, uniquely American philosophy, pragmatism. The whole idea behind pragmatism is simple, but it's also revolutionary. It says that ideas aren't good because they're true in some abstract eternal way. No, they're good if they work. Thinking is an instrument, a tool for navigating the world and solving the problems we run into in our actual lived experience.
William James just captured this shift perfectly. Pragmatists like him and Dewey, they just weren't interested anymore in that neat, tidy through-and-through universe that the idealists were obsessed with. They were ready to get on board with a world that was messy, uncertain, and still very much in the making.
So, with this new pragmatic toolkit in hand, Dewey was able to build his most enduring and challenging idea, a complete reimagining of what democracy is and, more importantly, what it could be.
You see, for Dewey, defining democracy as just the rule of the many was a total disaster. He called that sovereignty chopped up into mincemeat. True democracy, he argued, wasn't a political system. It was a moral ideal. It was a way of living together where we see ourselves not as isolated atoms, like a heap of grains of sand, but as fundamentally connected, all sharing in a common life and a common purpose.
And this way of life? Well, it wasn't passive. It demanded constant practice. For Dewey, building these habits of communication and collaboration, that was the real work of every single institution. From our families and workplaces to, most importantly, our schools.
But here's the thing about Dewey. He wasn't just a theorist. He wasn't some guy sitting in an armchair thinking big thoughts. He was an experimenter. He believed that if his ideas were going to be more than just words on a page, they had to be put to the test in the real world.
And his most famous experiment, the University of Chicago Laboratory School, completely flipped the script. I mean, traditional schools wanted kids to be docile and obedient. Dewey School, it prized alertness. Traditional schools just imposed subjects from the outside. Dewey's school started with problems that grew right out of the child's own experience. The teacher was no longer a boss just dictating facts, but a guide, helping students learn how to think, not just what to think.
Now, don't mistake this for some kind of free-for-all. It's easy to hear this and think it's all just child-centered permissiveness, but that's not it at all. Dewey's philosophy placed this immense, almost sacred responsibility on the teacher. He saw the teacher as a social servant, an artist whose job was to shape a democratic character. They were tasked with nothing less than creating the conditions for a better society, one student at a time.
Ultimately, Dewey's work isn't a set of final answers. It's a challenge. And honestly, it's a challenge that rings even more true today than it did 100 years ago.
Dewey saw that modern life had basically thrown all of us together into what he called a great society. We're all interconnected, our actions affect people we will never ever meet. But he said that's not enough. The whole point is to turn this great society into a great community. And that takes work. It requires a conscious effort to improve how we communicate so we can see our shared reality clearly and then build a shared interest in shaping our future together, intelligently and cooperatively.
And that brings us right to the question he leaves for us. In our world of social media echo chambers, rampant misinformation, and these deep, seemingly unbridgeable divides, how do we do it? How do we perfect our means of communication? How do we build that shared, intelligent interest in our common problems? Dewey's quest to make democracy a lived daily reality, well, it remains the great, unfinished project of our time.